freezing gale.
I need more time.
I will take out your heart.
Hey guys, so I want to talk about this build that I'm doing or was doing. This build is pretty much pure glass cannon. For the most part, I played with 0 armor, 0 evasion, 0 block. I did have resistances obviously, but it was pure glass cannon and it wasn't very pleasant to play. But once I started like spamming Frostwall to block enemies, to block their projectiles, my survivability went up by a lot. So glass cannon does work, but it does kind of require you to block enemies essentially. Initially I wanted to use Frostbolts with the Ice Nova. You know how in PoE 1 Frostbolts and Ice Nova is like a cool combo. You can use Ice Nova on the Frostbolt to kind of repeat multiple times. And with Spell Cascade it also works kind of in an interesting way, because Spell Cascade does like 3 overlaps, right? But on one Frostbolt it kind of does once, and then the second time both I think happens. So I thought that, oh wow, that's gonna like shotgun and do so much damage, but it wasn't really performing very well. So I swapped from Ice Nova into Cold Snap, which does a lot of damage, but AoE is small, it consumes the Frostbolt, and in the end it still didn't really perform very well. I'm explaining all this because some of you may take inspiration from this build and want to adapt to your own liking, so that you would know at least what to expect. So yeah, Cold Snap can do a lot of damage, but it's tricky to use. You want to get reduced projectile speed because you don't want projectiles to fly too far away before you detonate them, and AoE was a bit small, and in the end it still did not perform well. So then I decided Snakepit is an interesting choice for this because it disables spears. Normally Frostbolt just pierces through enemies infinitely. Frostbolt actually has 2-part kind of damage. One part is when it passes through enemies, does damage, but the other part that does more damage is actually explosion when it collides with terrain. You can see explosions happen. A funny thing, and I didn't expect that they would implement it this way, because we had issues in Path of Exile 1 with Frostwall and people being able to hit that wall with their own projectiles. They had to remove that because it was just broken. But here it seems to be working, so you can actually hit your own Frostwall and the Frostwall explodes doing damage, and then the Frostbolt hits that wall, and because of Snakepit it does not pierce it, but it either chains or forks. I made it to fork, because when it forks it splits into 2 projectiles. You shoot 3 projectiles, it hits the wall and it splits into 6 projectiles. Now some of these projectiles immediately hit another Frostwall and explode, which means Frostwall explodes, Frostbolt explodes, and the other ones that didn't explode most likely hit the enemy and explode, hitting the Frostwall that didn't explode, which then explodes again. So the shotgunning with this is actually kind of nuts. Rare monsters pretty much don't exist, and bosses die very quickly. I'm using level 19 gems, this is level 86 now, and my weapon is pretty good, but you can still get, let's say, +2 to all skills and another plus at least 1 on gems if you could corrupt your gems to level 21. So the damage potential is still much higher than this, and this is Infernalist because I initially started an Ignite build, but I hated how Ignite feels and nothing with Incinerate synergized, so I just reworked into Cold Freeze build, and I've been enjoying since then. Now the clear speed is not as amazing, and another cool part is Snakepit. When it splits the projectiles it's much easier to clear. At first I was using support gem that gives you like 20% chance for the projectiles to fire in a circle around you for the Frostbolt, and it was lagging my PC very much because it was producing too many projectiles, and then all of them leave the chilling ground, and then all of them hit something, and then they split and then hit the wall, and it just was causing a lot of performance problems. And you can actually clear with just Frostbolt and Snakepit. It's actually very pleasant, and you kind of want to do that because it doesn't do very good damage on the first hit when it doesn't explode. So you may actually want to use something else for clearing, like Eye of Winter works well. Infernalist actually has only one good thing for this. Well, actually you can find more good things, but I'm not sure if I would recommend to go Infernalist necessarily. It's just I could not refund the Ascendancy class. But this one, Pyromantic Pact, essentially replaces your mana with Infernal Flames. You do not need to worry about the mana. And the mana could be a big issue because I have Cast on Crit and Cast on Freeze, and the skills cost a lot of mana, so it can become pretty much unsustainable mana. But each time mana bar fills up, I take damage equal to my life plus energy shield as fire damage. So you can mitigate that with the fire resistance and getting maximum fire resistance, which I did not. The dog is kind of nice, but early on it's dying pretty much all the time. But this one does give 30% more critical damage bonus. So my critical damage on, let's say, Frostbolt is currently 426% critical damage bonus. That's quite a lot. However, you do ignite yourself for 15% of your life and energy shield per second, which can be also mitigated, and getting regen. It doesn't feel that bad. You see, I got ignited and my life is, I mean, it's degening, but it's not that bad. Also, I do damage to myself, so it's kind of sketchy build. I'm not sure, I went over other classes and I'm not sure what I would recommend, but if you want to maximize the Frostwall, because you have 3 charges for the Frostwall, and if you don't use Frostwall, your damage kind of sucks unless you rely on IF Inter. But if you want to specifically rely on shotgunning, you may actually want a class that has cooldown reduction. Chronomancer, I think Chronomancer has cooldown reduction. That way you can spam Frostwall more often and shotgun more often, because during boss fight pretty much run out of Frostwalls. Like I tried to spam it and now I have to wait, and my Frostwall is linked with increased cooldown reduction. Yeah, it has increased cooldown recovery rate. By the way, I don't have 5 socket gems at all, and I'm not even sure what I would even add. We kind of lack support gems, useful support gems for skills. If you use multiple skills, you kind of run out of support gems that you can use, because you cannot use the same support gem unless you are Legionnaire. So I'm gonna talk about my items and skills and supports and passive tree. If you're gonna be refunding out of dog, make sure you take out the support gems, because if you refund out of dog as I land, you're gonna lose the dog and you're gonna lose those support gems. The dog is actually linked to last gasp. If the life reaches 0, it will still survive for the next 4 seconds, so it's actually very nice. It only has 4,500 life right now, and it also has meat shield to make it tankier, elemental army to make it tankier, and +1 minutes to make it tankier, and it's still dying pretty much all the time. Maybe I should mention my items. I am using Bacon of Aziz Amulet, which makes my critical damage ignore enemy monster resistances, which means if I have high enough crit chance, I do not need to worry about penetration, I do not need to worry about lowering enemy resistance or cursing them or applying exposure. None of those are gonna matter. Critical hits ignore enemy monster elemental resistances. You can have a similar thing on the passive tree. Hits ignore non-negative elemental resistances of frozen enemies. Previously I tried playing with just this one without the amulet, and it didn't feel good, because in order to freeze enemies, you need to hit hard, and you're not gonna hit hard if enemies have a lot of resistances and you have no penetration, or you cannot lower enemy resistances. So because I don't need penetration or exposure, I have way fewer support gems that I can use. So the Frostbolt is linked to +1 to cold, obviously. Scatter Shot for more projectiles, but you could probably get away by getting, I believe, up to 50% chance for the projectiles to fire 2 additional projectiles. You can get here and you can get a bit of here. Then Arcane Tempo for more cast speed, because again I want to be able to use it very quickly, or as quickly as I can. And by the way, while moving, if you don't just spam the button, you can actually move quite quickly. Cast once, move, cast once, move, and it feels a lot kind of smoother. And lastly, I am using, for the Frostbolts, using Magnified Field for more AoE, for the more overlaps. I'm actually not sure if that's the best setup. I really don't know, but for me it felt great. Next, I'm using Cast on Freeze. I'm using Comet inside Cast on Freeze. Comet doesn't matter how many supports it has, how many sockets it has. You just want the higher level, so you can just corrupt Comet to +1 levels and then use more supports for the Cast on Freeze. It is linked to Spell Echo. It does echo, and it is pretty nice to see a bunch of comets falling down. And Impetus, whatever it's called, for the kind of increased energy gain, because the cast and read, all the meta jumps require you to ramp up the energy, and then once it reaches a certain threshold, it just triggers all the linked skills. Same for the cast and crit, but I'm using Eye of Winter, which applies, it's not really for the damage, although it does quite a lot of damage as well, but it's mostly to apply critical weakness, which does basically gives you more crit chance. And remember, whenever you crit, you ignore enemy resistances, you have a lot of critical damage, you want to be critting all the time. And then this one just to increase the freeze buildup. Actually, I'm not even sure what else. For the Frostwall, you also want to keep it a high level, I assume. I'm actually not entirely sure what does more damage, Frostwall or Frostbolt. I feel like every time I do like massive burst of damage is when most of the Frostbolts explode like that. But other times when it just kind of passes through almost, it doesn't do much damage. So Frostwall is also for the damage, but as you can see, I only have 3 supports for the Frostwall, and it is inspiration to lower the cost because you don't want to take damage essentially. Whenever you spam and fill this mana bar, you take damage, and you don't want that. So CDR to be able to spam it, and this one is, I couldn't find what else to use for damage essentially. Supported skills deal 40% more damage with hits against enemies that are on low life, which is 35% life or less. You could use something like increased critical damage support, but less critical chance. But again, I would rather make sure that I crit and ignore enemy resistances and have big crit multiplier, because if you don't crit, your damage is very bad compared to the crit. Arctic armor, getting enough spirit was also kind of tricky, but Arctic armor is linked with the cannibalism. This one is, I feel like, important, but if you can get recover life on kill somewhere else, you don't need this. And Arctic armor itself doesn't really provide much, because most enemies not gonna be able to hit you with melee, and this only works against melee attacks. And Enfeeble, I'm also not sure, pretty much never use it, but I feel like Temporal Chain may actually be much stronger. You temp chain, and the freeze should expire slower on that enemy. The freeze should last for a very long time. As for the items, the main item, Bacon of Aziz, not necessarily, but you could go with Pandemonius, which is kind of better because it doesn't care about your crit chance. You always penetrate. Enemies most likely not gonna have more than 75 resistances ever. So this basically just works the same way as Ignore, but you don't need to crit. However, you do not get Spirit, and I did need Spirit. You don't have to run Arctic Armor. If you drop Arctic Armor, you could replace this and use Pandemonius, which does at least have some cold rest. Next, Snakepit, and the rest of the items you want as much life as possible, because unless you figure out some other defensive layers, life and resistances. And I did socket the percent increase maximum life soul cores instead of flat life. I tried different approaches and tried to figure out how to get enough defenses. Okay, there are a couple of reasons why I couldn't figure out what to do about my defenses. First of all, Infernal Flame, I cannot really go mana. I tried it and I could not sustain my mana even while mapping, while using the mana flask. It was just way too much. So I had to use Infernal Flame. Okay, if you go life plus energy shield, remember, each time your Infernal Flame fills up, you take damage equal to life plus energy shield. Not percentage, but all the life plus energy shield will be taken as fire damage, which is mitigated by fire resistance. However, the more energy shield you stack, the more damage you still take. So each time you trigger this, which does happen pretty often, you're gonna lose your energy shield. And I was trying to use Eternal Youth and building up energy shield, so I had like almost 2000 energy shield, but my energy shield does not recharge and I keep damaging it. I had to use Life Flask to refill my energy shield. Life Flask was the only way to get back energy shield. But because the damage is combined life plus energy shield, you take so much damage into energy shield, and the more you stack, the more you take. It's really hard to sustain this Infernal Flame damage. And even if you take this node, which actually does nothing unless you get maximum fire resistance and here's rest, and then reserve some of the life, so you lose some of the life to gain, let's say, energy shield. You do gain quite a bit of energy shield, but again, getting more energy shield means you're gonna take more damage into that energy shield. Maybe there is some kind of shenanigans you could do with that, but for me it was not pleasant. I ended up with this kind of passive skill tree. Initially I was traveling through here. I wanted to reach these nodes. There's more crit chance, there's more crit damage, and there's just so much crit, and then just getting a cube here, and then traveling to this one for even more crit chance, crit damage, getting more a cube here. These I feel like are not necessarily important, but freeze build-up is very important. Then there's more crit chance. Then these one are for meta skills. If you're going with the Infernal Flames with my setup, you do want Eldritch Battery, because if you are unable to recover energy shield quickly while being damaged, then having energy shield means you're gonna be taking more damage and you won't really benefit from having energy shield. So you're just gonna take more damage from Infernal Flames self-damage, and you're not gonna have that energy shield because you don't have a way to recover it. So it's better to just convert that energy shield into mana. The more mana you have, the less frequently you're gonna trigger the Infernal Flames damage. This one just for the projectile speed. I needed more intelligence, more crit chance here. This one is very important, +1 cold. I did anoint this thing just to get a bit more strength, because strength is flat life, and 35 crit chance, that's one of the highest crit chance nodes I have found, and losing mana doesn't matter. You could maybe use Rise of the Phoenix unique shield, which I did try using. Rise of the Phoenix gives maximum fire resistance, which means you're gonna take less damage from fire hits, you're gonna take less damage from self hits, and you're gonna take less ignite damage from, well, you can actually self ignite by taking the damage from Infernal Flame. It doesn't happen all the time. It takes like 8 procs to self ignite with this. I swear you can self ignite. I'm not making this up. There you go. There you go. Now you see I self-ignited with this Infernal Flames proc. So Rise of the Phoenix could give more mitigation for that. You also get life regen. You could also combine this with another belt that gives up to 5% to maximum fire resistance, and then combine those soul cores which you socket into rune sockets, another 5% to maximum fire res, and you could have like 90% fire resistance and have a lot of mitigation. And maybe go with the Cloak of Flames, which 40% of physical damage taken as fire. Then from this you would be getting a lot more mitigation if you have maximum fire resistance. So that's one way you could do it, but you would lose quite a lot of damage and it would be harder to get maximum life, because that's no life. The belt would also be no life, I believe, and then like Cloak of Flames also no life. So essentially you get mitigation but you lose maximum life. So are you really getting more effective HP? I'm not too sure, but that's an option. The charm, I put it on at level 12 and I never replaced it. Anti-freeze, so I don't get frozen. That's it. I don't care about charms. The mana flash doesn't work with this. Now if you're wondering, Mind Over Matter also does not interact with Infernal Flames. You cannot consume Infernal Flames with any skill that would consume. Appears to be no other interactions with Infernal Flame and no trick as far as I can tell. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this video. I want to play melee and I want to play water, and maybe I'm thinking shield skills like Resonating Shield and the Shield Wall and the Shield Charge, those skills. The Shield Wall looks like it could actually do quite a bit of shotgunning, and I believe this probably would have potential similar to the Frostwall with the Frostbolt interaction, because you can just blow it up and you can have up to 4, maybe there's some unique to have even more walls, so you could build 4 walls and then slam and they explode and do a bunch of like shotgunning damage. So I'm most likely gonna try that. Now also, if you have some suggestions what kind of defenses I could use for this build, I would still want to maybe improve the defenses or mess around with this build. There's a trick with demon form where you can sustain 300-600 demon form stacks, which give, or what is it called, demon flame stacks, which you could get over 10,000 increased spell damage, which sounds nuts, but that's after 10 seconds of waiting and staying in the map, because it's 100% gonna get capped and nerfed to like 40, 50 at most. But yeah, I would still like to improve this build and mess around a bit more and finish farming tier 15s and 16s before diving into warrior. So yeah, that's it for now. Thank you for watching and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.